The Watcher of the Blue-Eyed Soldier by the Confused Camper. The old cemetery lay just on the outskirts of town, where the trees stood like silent sentinels, and the wind whispered secrets of a time long past. For decades, its gravestones had been worn down by weather, their inscriptions barely legible. But there was one monument that never seemed to age, an imposing statue of a Civil War soldier, standing tall with his rifle clutched in one hand, his other raised in a silent salute. It was positioned at the far end of the cemetery, at the foot of a hill, as though he were eternally guarding the dead. The most striking feature of the statue, however, was the soldier's eyes. They were made of a smooth, polished blue stone, so vivid and unnatural that they seemed to glow under the moonlight, especially when the wind stirred the trees and the night grew darker. The locals had long called him the Watcher, for they swore the statue's eyes followed anyone who dared to approach it. For years, it was nothing more than a strange curiosity, the sort of eerie landmark that children dared each other to visit. But then, on a bitter autumn evening, something changed. It was a night like any other when Michael, a young historian from the nearby town, decided to explore the cemetery. He had heard the rumors about the blue-eyed soldier and found them fascinating. Stories of soldiers who never left their posts, of restless spirits trapped in the form of stone, had always intrigued him. Armed with a flashlight and a notebook, he ventured into the cemetery, his footsteps crunching over the fallen leaves. The moon was nearly full, casting an ethereal glow across the landscape, and as Michael made his way to the far end of the cemetery, he could feel the weight of the soldier's eyes on him. The further he walked, the stronger the sensation grew, until he found himself standing before the statue, staring up at those piercing blue eyes. Nothing more than stone, he whispered to himself, trying to shake the uneasy feeling that gripped his chest. He crouched down to examine the base of the statue, where an inscription read, "In honor of the brave souls lost in the war." As he copied the inscription into his notebook, he heard a faint noise, like a distant murmur, a voice carried on the wind. It was so soft, so faint, that he couldn't be sure if he had imagined it. Suddenly, the wind stopped, and the temperature dropped. Michael's breath became visible in the cold air as he stood, feeling a strange chill run down his spine. His eyes flicked back up to the soldier's face. For the first time, he noticed something strange. The soldier's eyes. They weren't still. They were slowly shifting, moving ever so slightly, as though they were following him. A sudden panic surged through Michael's chest. He backed away, but his feet felt heavy, as though the ground was holding him in place. The air felt thick, oppressive, like something was closing in around him. And then, the soldier's lips moved. It was barely perceptible at first, an almost imperceptible shift of the stone, a barely audible whisper. But as Michael's heart pounded in his chest, the words became clear, "Leave now." Michael froze, unable to speak or move, the terror clawing at his throat. He tried to turn and run, but his legs wouldn't respond. Instead, he found himself drawn closer, slowly, unwillingly, toward the statue. The soldier's blue eyes were no longer just following him. They were locking onto him, pulling him in, as though they could see into his very soul. The statue's once stiff form began to shift. It was so gradual that at first, Michael thought he was imagining it. But then the figure's chest expanded as though it were breathing, and the soldier's hand slowly gripped his rifle tighter, as though preparing for something. The whispers grew louder, more insistent now, echoing in Michael's ears. "Leave, or you'll stay with us." The ground trembled beneath his feet, and the coldness deepened. Michael finally managed to tear his gaze away from the statue's eyes, and with every ounce of strength in his body, he forced himself to turn and run. His feet pounded against the earth, but it felt like the cemetery itself was fighting him, the air thick with something unseen, something ancient. When he finally made it to the cemetery's gate, Michael glanced back over his shoulder, heart racing. The statue stood silent once more, but its eyes, those unnatural blue eyes, were still watching, unblinking. The next morning, the townspeople found Michael, pale and trembling, sitting by the cemetery gate. He never spoke a word after that, his eyes wide with a terror no one could understand. But every night, the people of the town would swear they could see the blue-eyed soldier watching from the hill, his gaze never leaving the cemetery, waiting for the next curious soul, foolish enough to look too long. And if you ever find yourself walking near that old cemetery, be careful where you look, because the Watcher has seen you, and he's waiting. Thanks for watching, and please hit the like and subscribe buttons for more stories.